This is Keep Up. I'm your host, Cynthia Dill. It is Friday, April 24th, 2026. I'm in my Cape Elizabeth studio and the snow is melted. Spring is on the way. It's still chilly, but they're buds and birds and bees. So lucky me. And I'm feeling especially grateful lately because I am really in kind of up to my neck in the latest case that I've brought that's challenging the law in Maine that says the Department of Corrections has to affirm the gender identity of inmates. And the result of that ridiculous law is that convicted murderer Andrew Balcer came forth as a woman in 2022 and was transferred to the Women's Center. And women there forced to house with him, house, bathe, shower, be in a locked cell with a man who still is fully intact and is in prison for 40 years for stabbing his parents to death when he was 17 and killing his dog. And and he's a menace and a predator, and he has been preying on the women who are forced to house with him at the Maine Correctional Center. No surprise there, right? That's what happens when you put men with women in prison, and that's why, like every civilized society has rules against it, and we had rules against it in Maine, up until just recently when the legislature passed the law that said the Maine Department of Corrections shall, under penalty of death practically, affirm without question the gender identity of inmates and just let them be wherever they feel that they need to be. And hey, you know what? If you're a predator, you know where you want to be? You want to be right in the middle of the women's center in locked cells with vulnerable women that, who weigh half as much as you do and have a traumatic past. And that's what's going on here in Maine. And so I'm grateful for my very privileged perch here on in a beautiful town, surrounded by a lot of a safety net. I have friends, I have family, I have resources. There's food in my refrigerator. Um, there's oil in the tank, and the the lack of infrastructure, the lack of relationships, the lack of resources for the women in prison is just shocking. They're in prison generally because of drug addiction, not for committing violence, although there certainly are women there for committing violence. But a lot of them are for possession of or using, making money off of fentanyl. And um, it's just so they are housed with this guy, Andrew Balcer. He's sexually assaulting and harassing and threatening to essentially kill them. He says really creepy things and does very, very disturbing things, like patting their hair and saying, "Well, if you don't wake up, it's because I smothered you." And in one instance, forcing it, up against the wall, forced kiss, you know, groping. A lot of sexual innuendo, inappropriate jokes, threats about rape and impregnating and making babies, and just weird and off the wall behavior by somebody who has no remorse for killing his parents. In fact, he makes sick jokes about, oh, I guess I don't need to make a Mother's Day card, and other references to the gruesome killing of his parents that left his brother alone. So here's a guy who, would you want to be locked in a cell with him if you happen to be in jail for violation of probation? No. Would you want your daughter to be locked up in a cell with him? No, you wouldn't. So these women who came from nothing, okay, many of them spent their youth in the youth center because they had mothers who were drug addicts and in some cases trafficked them, and fathers who were abused and then absent. So these poor kids have been caught up in this dreadful system. Okay, if you haven't heard about Long Creek Youth Center, Google it. It has like a terrible reputation of really redeeming anybody. It's the pits, and it's the only thing going for kids who are disturbed and neglected and abused here in Maine. And so some of these women now, that's where they came from. And They stand up for themselves at the Maine Correctional Center because they're being assaulted and threatened by this guy Balcer. So now they're all in segregation. I have 4 clients. They're all in segregation while this guy Balcer is in the women's center. And that's because of this gender affirming law. And that's why when I say that gender identity laws discriminate against women and harm kids, this is the discriminate against women part. Because in this instance, the women, the real women who are housed in the women's center, they can't enjoy the benefits of the women's center because they refused, house with Balcer. They report it, they complain about it, they speak up. And for doing so, they're put in segregation. And in segregation, it's a totally bad scene. It's segregation is where people are in trouble. So there's a lot of people like crying and moaning, and you're in a very, very small room with maybe one other person, no windows, no fresh air. You only get 3 hours out of your cell a day, maybe if you're lucky. You never get to go outside. You don't get to go to church. You don't get to go to the cafeteria. You don't get to do any crafts. You don't get to go to, you don't have any privileges whatsoever. You get 1 book a week in segregation. I don't understand it. The women who complained about this guy Balcer, that's where they are right now, right as we speak. That's why I took this case. That's why I'm like raring to go on this case. And it's going to be a while though, because we have to serve the defendants. They have 60 days, and then there's going to be litigation. I mean, I don't know if anything can be done in the near future, but I'm going to try. I mean, it would be nice if the United States put some resources into this and intervened and tried to get a injunction and get these women out of segregation, put them in the women's center and put this guy Balcer in segregation. That would be the ideal short-term solution in my view. That would be the relief that I would seek. And I hope that that happens. But if it doesn't, and it might not because the standards are so high, and there's so much discretion given to the law enforcement officers trying to run this jail, and because we have this law in Maine that says they have to, that's a big factor. But I do think that this case is going to get up to the Supreme Court because it challenges some of the, like, just the rot. It's the rot that is in our culture right now that is producing this gender, ideology nonsense, like I said, that we see in its extreme in this instance where we have a guy, right? He's a guy. He has a penis. He points to his erection and makes jokes about his 10-man tent. He threatens to impregnate people. He uses it as a sexual weapon and at the same time demands people to refer to him as a woman. And we're supposed to affirm it. We have to affirm it by law. No, that's government imposed ideology. But we're also, really fighting this on behalf of these women who are being assaulted and threatened by him. He's touching them. Every single touch is unwanted. Every threat is, it's cruel and unusual punishment. And it's just downright discrimination that the women don't get to enjoy the benefits of the women's center because the men are there. I mean, that is just crazy town. So I just want to remind everybody who follows this podcast that I am not a transphobe. Okay. I have been a civil rights lawyer my whole life. I'm a huge supporter in equal rights, but the gender identity laws that we have are not about equal rights or civil rights. They are oppressive, they discriminate against women, and they harm children because they're absolutely ridiculous. The gender identity law says that any person can identify as a gender. They don't identify gender. Any man can identify as a woman at any time and enjoy every benefit of womanhood, including the extreme of grown men in young girls' locker rooms at the YMCA, grown men imposing on lesbian, groups that want to just have a lesbian group and men insisting on being because they identify as a lesbian. Men taking over women's sports, taking medals, boys stealing medals from girls. And if you don't think that that's happening, like you're not awake. Okay. You got to get your head out of your tunnel because it is happening. It's real. And in the case of the prisons, these women being subjected to these horrific conditions. Now, granted, the Maine Correctional Center is Is nothing to I mean, at least as far as I can see, it's a very well-run organization. It appears to be very clean, and I things obviously could be worse, but this is a pretty bad situation, and I don't understand it. What is the possible correction, motive for denying these women, all of them who have active minds, they have to be in their cell for, like, over 20 hours with nothing to do, with 1 book a week? These are women who got their GED at the youth center and have overcome so much, and they escape in a book because it's the only thing that they can do, and the prison only gives them 1 a week. But meanwhile, Andrew Balcer, you know, he's a predator put in a playground. And why? Because he's a man identifying as a woman. We have this stupid, ridiculous, unconstitutional gender affirmation law that was passed by, of course, the Democrats here in Maine. And none of the Democrats are willing to even question it. They refuse to even have the debate. So it's still the mantra of the Democratic Party that if you question the ridiculousness of the statement, "Are trans women women?" No, trans women are trans women. Men who identify as women, great. All the power to you. All the power to you. I don't discriminate against people who are transgender, but what I do care about deeply is recognizing the biological reality of sex because males and females are different, right? Females have XX chromosomes, uh, produce eggs, and can have children. What is a woman? Well, it's an adult female human. And men, they have sperm and obviously different anatomical. They have different parts, and they have XY chromosomes. And those are things that like are not changeable. And it matters. It matters in separating people, and it's not unreasonable to separate people on the basis of sex. And the only way you can have protections on the basis of sex is if you actually separate people, or at least have a system to separate them. And the system is the system that we've relied on all along up until 5 minutes ago, males and females. Okay, sex is binary. Sex is binary, so is the computer code. Get over it. You're either, yes, there's a few very, very rare exceptions, but sex for the most part is binary. Gender is on a spectrum. Gender is fluid. Gender is non binary. So you can have both. You can have a recognition of the biological reality of sex and protect women on the basis of sex in these instances where it really matters. Private sports, private places, sports teams. And you can also have a recognition of gender identity and one's right to express oneself in whatever fashion you want. Great. I think that's the First Amendment. I think that definition of gender identity is so uh, random and arbitrary, and it's impossible to actually apply because it's like a gender identity is you can either identify as male, female, both, neither, or something else. It's like that off into space. Like, okay, so what that does is it sort of makes everybody think, oh, even though this person is obviously, demonstrating deviant, sexual, weird behavior, we're supposed to just accept it because I guess it might be in this penumbra of gender identity, which is this, that, and the other thing. No, 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 no. You can express yourself. If you identify as a man, go for it. If you identify as a woman, go for it. But, let's keep it clear that you don't just get to think your way into being a woman, and women deserve protection on the basis of sex. So this prison case, these very, very courageous women who are challenging the system are going to be kind of the incubator, really, for testing this theory about government imposed orthodoxy on the heels of the Supreme Court case that came out of Colorado about the counselor. Oh, I can't think of the name of the case right now, but I'm sure you all know the one. Childs, I think. Childs v. Salazar, maybe. Um, but the good thing that I discovered, these women, like I said, who are un unbelievably brave and strong to have overcome some of the things that they've overcome, they're also finding a sense of purpose, like, for the first time in their lives. participating in this process, trying to make the system better, even though they know in the short run nothing's really going to change for them. They're going to be in segregation. They're going to have to stick it out. And they're going to hopefully be able to get some strength knowing that they're changing the system for good. So that's why I really hope that this case is, does change things, really shines a magnifying glass on this gender identity concept because it really came out of nowhere. We never had a conversation as a society or culture about the implications gender identity would have on women and girls. It came up in Maine as a clarification of the Maine Human Rights Act. Nobody mentioned that it was gonna completely change the landscape for women and girls and just open up every restroom, every shower, every sports team to anybody who identifies as a as a as a woman. No, we didn't talk about that, and people who wanna point to that, uh Maine's case, the law court case, Nicole Maines, that was, the one of the early on cases where they found that Nicole Maines had, in fact, gender dysphoria, and, she had a right to use the girls' bathroom because she identi you know, but they said at the end, "We're not saying anybody who says that they're a girl can use the girls' bathroom. That's not what we're saying at all. They're saying in this case, there were several doctors who weighed in, the school counselors, they had been, clearly tracking this issue of gender dysphoria for quite some time. And it was a 504 case. It was about accommodating an established and accepted condition, gender dysphoria. That's not what gender identity is. That's totally different. That is above. I mean, this is just so far down the road that, we gotta pull it back. We gotta pull up, it's like bitter root. It's spread so quickly. As soon as we made this clarification in the Maine Human Rights Act to gender identity, that's what led to now what is the gender affirmation laws that are, just showing, finally at horrific expense of these female inmates how ridiculous the policy is. That you just have to accept someone's self-reported gender identity, and in this case, you got this guy who's clearly a predator weaponizing his maleness in the women's center and completely abusing his authority and given so much power by this gender affirmation law. He's the king of the walk, if you know what I mean. I guess you could call him the cock of the walk. In fact, you should, and now I will. I mean, so, uh, kudos to the women, who are fighting this battle, and shame on the affluent, snotty, elitist women who think that because, uh, who are gonna call out this as hate or transphobia or, you gotta this is about women and girls' rights and safety and privacy and dignity, and that's that. And until next time, this is Cynthia Dill signing off. Take care. Oh, I gotta push my